Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We know how difficult it is to take time out of your practice and your family, but we think it's going to be well worth your effort and your time. I'm Jane Beeman, the Director of Clinical and Scientific Affairs now for Euclid Systems, and we've got a lot of great, exciting things for you tonight. We have an esteemed panel. They're going to give us some opinions on orthokeratology, where it stands today. And then I have the great pleasure of introducing you to the newest product to join our Euclid portfolio. A couple of housekeeping tips. I do want to remind you that this is scheduled as a 90-minute program. So I don't want you to click out at 60 minutes and realize you missed the last 30 minutes. So it is scheduled to run for 90 minutes tonight. We will not be taking questions as the program goes on, but we would like all of you to type in any questions you may have as we go along for the panelists, for myself, or anything in general. Put them into the Q&A feature, and at the end of the program, I do have time slotted to answer as many of your topics and questions as we can. So everybody get ready, and let's take a few moments and get ourselves comfortable. I do need to remind you that this presentation is the opinion of our industry leaders and our panelists, and does not have to reflect the FDA definition of orthokeratology or our specific approvals at Euclid. All right, let's meet our panel tonight. We have an exciting group of practitioners. I was telling this group a little earlier, I've been a little worried whether I could keep them under control. I'm expecting a lot of energy and a whole lot of interesting debate tonight and questions. So let me introduce you. I'm going to start with Dr. Dave Kading. Dr. Kading is from the Washington area, state of Washington. He has, I believe, 3 private practices now. With many different areas of general optometry, but certainly specialty contact lens fitting and myopia management, a keen interest for him. Our next panelist is Dr. Kevin Chan. Kevin is with Treehouse Eyes, and he he's their director at their Washington, D.C. metro areas. So he has involved in a huge referral practice of myopia management from all across Virginia, Maryland, and the metro area. Dr. Susan Resnick is joining us. Dr. Resnick is from New York and has a little bit of a different kind of a practice, but an extremely successful specialty lens kind of practice, and has great opinions and information to offer us tonight. And then the 4th member of our esteemed panel is Than Mai. Dr. Mai is a West Coast person. Than is from California. He also has a growing and thriving private practice, and he also is involved in many, many specialty lens projects. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Now, many of you have tuned in tonight because you've heard some of the teaser information going out from our marketing group that we will be unveiling our newest lens product tonight. So if you haven't heard from your friends that may have tuned in last night, you're going to get the same information tonight, and we'll be glad to answer your questions about this new product at the end. So let's talk orthokeratology and the state of where this business is today. So panelists, if you would all flip on your cameras, we'd like to see your little faces. Ah, there they come. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so now you can connect faces with the names if you don't know these guys. You're going to see these faces if you're just getting into Ortho-K. These are many of the people, Dr. Kading is going to hide from us. Many of these faces are the people that you'll be seeing in article writing and online, that many of them do podcasts. They're involved in many, many educational So remember their names. They're going to give you a lot of guidance tonight. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to start out. Yeah, I'm going to start out by just a general question, and I'd like to kind of get a little bit of information from each of the four of you. So, we're talking about this shifting that's coming in the Ortho-K and the myopia management business. Let's talk about looking back a few years to today. Where does Ortho-K fit into your practice, and how has Ortho-K fitting changed in the last few years?
Yeah,
Who'd
Jane,
like
I'll
to
I'll I'll
I
I'll jump
sure
in
say,
there.
Dr. Katie, jump in there.
Yeah. So, I think when we originally started doing myopia management in our practices, we really kind of just thought about it as being an orthokeratology thing. Dating back to the early days of developmental optometry. There was some talk within the spectacle worlds, but we really haven't seen studies with spectacle eyeglasses be all that effective. Those studies kind of showed 25, maybe 37%, 38% improvement. And so as we started getting into myopia management in our practice, we really positioned it as just orthokeratology. And then as time kind of went on, these other things kind of came along and we worked to see where they fit into our practices. And they're a part of our practices. But for me speaking, orthokeratology still holds such a huge weight in it because, and I think this is the reason, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but because of its simplicity for children and their parents. Is it something they just do at night and then the parent doesn't have to worry about it during the day? Parents are concerned about some parents are concerned about soft contact lens wear during the day. And so more than anything, orthokeratology has stayed. We're adding soft lenses here and there, and then we're adding atropine on top of our orthokeratology usage in our practice. I'd be curious to see if anybody has seen that shift in their practice.
Mhm.
Jane, I'm going to jump in with a little bit of a more of a historical perspective, just because I might be a couple of years older than my esteemed colleagues here. But some 30 years ago, 25 years ago, we were doing orthokeratology, and it wasn't as formalized. Your companies were not really didn't have designs, but we were creating these lenses from here, not from sophisticated digital and electronic devices, but we were doing it. And I have colleagues that are much older than me, and I could name names, but these are like giants in our field, and we were doing it. And interestingly, it was pure orthokeratology. It was purely from the standpoint that this is an alternative to contact lens wear or spectacle wear during the day, prior to any refractive surgery being available, children being among the most benefited because of the athletic look upon it. They didn't have to, if they went to swim meets or had basketball games, I had ballet dancers. Children are in the same activities now that they were then that they are now. And many of them did not want to wear lenses. And then anecdotally, and I'll use that word because we didn't have the studies to show that there was an effect of stopping progression of myopia in many of these children, but we were seeing it on a daily basis. And I can recall one instance where I was interviewed by a local paper, and I mentioned that potentially, I said, I see this in my practice. I had no science behind it. I had no nothing behind it. And 10 days later, I got a letter from the medical board in my area threatening to revoke my license, no joke, because I was talking about something that was never proven, never existed, was forget just off label. I mean, they literally strung me up by my thumbs and they basically let it go because I was just rendering an opinion. But finally, we have the stuff to support what I was talking about some 30 years ago, 35 years ago. But now what's exciting for me is, and I've been complaining about it for 30 years, it never got into the radar. It was always below the radar. And we never had a way to get out there and say, look, guys, we've got this and it can do this. And so now at least it is totally legitimized. And for me, this is probably the most exciting aspect of my 40-year career in seeing children and adults and seeing very myopic patients. So I applaud everybody who's in the field and doing this now.
Tanya, I see you gave her the thumbs up. You know, you weren't around 35 years ago fitting lenses, but I can tell some of that resonated with you.
Yeah, no, props to that for sure. For us, I'd say we started with, doing orthokeratology mainly for myopia management, and it's kind of come over now. I'd say 10 years ago, it was kind of like a small group of us doing orthokeratology, and we'd have these small meetings and talk about how cool it is. And what's great about nowadays is I feel like myopia is heading towards the mainstream. I have emails and text messages from colleagues all around the country asking me about how to fit lenses, when to do atropine post orthokeratology, why would we do a MySight lens versus natural view. Like, these questions are popping up every day now, and I see it online on Facebook groups, and there are podcasts talking about myopia management. It's growing in popularity and exploding. I feel like this year, especially with COVID, which studies have shown it's making it only worse. And so I think it's an exciting time. At our office, we don't have a particular allegiance to only one method of myopia management. But what typically happens at our office, though, is even when I present any option equally, I'd say 80% of our patients opt for orthokeratology when they hear about all the choices. We do similar to orthodontistry. We're not selling rubber bands. We're not selling brackets. We're selling myopia management. But even then, they opt for orthokeratology, even over eye drops or anything like that. So that's how it is. Our practice, orthokeratology, is still the major beast, and it will probably continue to be so in the future.
Kevin, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so they're all good points. And for me, I think as I look back in my career, even though they're relatively fresh, but when I first started with orthokeratology in my practice, I started with adults. And just like Dr. Mai said, it's been one of the good alternative, but it's better than nothing. But, as I do more and more Ortho-K, I realized, how underestimated the market is for children. And we actually can have, do a little bit more, for serving our young population, because they actually represent our, next generation, and their eyesight is, going to be, in our hand. And I think, in our market, I think this is still underrepresented. And I'm hoping, and I'm also optimistic about, the market is going to be pretty bright, for our practitioner. And so I think Ortho-K will be booming in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting that you guys all mentioned this. As most of us, when I first started, it was 35 years ago, and it was all adults. And as I've changed through the years and learned different uses for orthokeratology, but you mentioned the market changing. It's taken many years, it seems, to get our practitioner community understanding that this is a pandemic and it's a myopia epidemic on top of it. Yeah, Ton, you mentioned this, and I thought it was a really good point. I want to make sure all, especially the younger practitioners out there listening, the fact that the last 14 months we've been under the house control, has really put up the radar for the parents. I always had a few parents come in and say, I'm worried about their eyesight. But now parents are like, they are spending way too much time in the house. They can't go out. They are on these screens. And I think it's hurting their eyes. So help me. So it's interesting that you guys mentioned that, because I really hadn't thought about that. The pandemic, the COVID pandemic, has really helped us as it's brought that consumer awareness to the problems with myopia. So great start, guys. Great thought. Okay, let's talk about, I got some specific questions. Now, we just mentioned I've been doing this a long time, and I listen to a lot of webinars from a lot of people about a lot of topics. But I got to tell you, I've gotten a little confused recently. So I was listening to bunches of webinars. I had one practitioner talking about the treatment zone, and he kept alluding to it as it was a parameter of the lens that he could manipulate somehow. Then I was listening to somebody else, and they said, no, the treatment zone is the cornea and the part of the cornea that we're impacting. It's not a parameter. And then, heavens only knows, I listened to another one who told me the secret was to make to understand how big the posterior optic zone diameter was, and manipulate that. So I've gotten really confused here. So I'm looking for some guidance. So anybody want to give this a shot? We've dropped just a routine follow-up topo up there. Somebody want to give me your idea of, one, what are these different, this is a kind of a new specialty. We need to kind of develop some terminology that we can all understand. So who wants to help me out? If I said treatment zone, where would you point? What color up here?
I'll jump in. So
Susan?
I define treatment zone as you alluded to, it's the area of the cornea that we're affecting a change. When I think of treatment zone, I think of it in two ways. One is the central blue area, which I consider the refractive zone, and then the entire red to red on the outside. If we're talking about myopia management, I consider that whole area the treatment zone, because in myopia management, you're not just looking at the refractive zone, you're not just looking at the central correction of the myopia, but you're looking at that peripheral blur, hyperopic blur that you're getting within the pupil. So I look at it as that whole area that's within the pupil, the blue area being the refractive zone, the blue plus whatever red is in the pupil being the treatment zone for myopia management.
Yeah, Jane,
Anyone?
I'll
Yep.
speak a little bit. I'll speak a little bit to this particular topography here, and how we kind of think about this in the myopia management space or in the orthokeratology space. When I was learning orthokeratology, this topography would be a less than ideal topography for the patients that we were looking at, because at the time we called it the treatment zone, being the area that was blue, was not very large. And really, when we do a treatment on somebody, we're utilizing it to treat a condition. And at the time, we were treating myopia and the amount of nearsighted that the patient had. And the objective was to get as much nearsighted correction completed with our orthokeratology as we possibly could. And so, as such, we were attempting to get as large of a treatment zone at the time, again, describing that as the blue area, as we could, so that as the patient's pupil got larger, we would have an incredible amount of flattening. And as we look at the bottom below the treatment area here, we can see this wave-like pattern indicating, for those of you who don't look at these types of topographies all the time, the wave-like pattern is green in this particular topography means that there hasn't been really any difference between the pre-treatment and the post-treatment topography. The red indicates that we have added power or plus power, and minus indicates that we have corrected power or decreased the prescription. And so the treatment zone in this particular area, as we classically called it, is a very small area. It's that blue. And in that area here, you can see the pupil in that black circle, or in the bottom, it's the grayed in zone. Within this pupil, there's that blue treatment area, but then it goes up. And that indicates that there is increasing plus power in the periphery of this pupil. And historically, from a treatment perspective, we wouldn't have wanted that, because it could have potentially indicated glare and halos and shadows for patients. But now we think about orthokeratology for our myopia management patients. And what we want to do is we want to get treatment in the center, but we do want to get plus in the periphery. And as we've learned over the years, that is going to give us potentially the most ideal outcome that we would be getting for our patients. It's also the reason why we design myopic soft contact lenses in such a way to have plus in the periphery, to indicate that we're going to be giving those patients more ideal optics. So this is creating an ideal optic. The treatment zone for this particular patient is ideal for what we're trying to treat them with. But if we were treating a patient with a high that was an adult, prescription wasn't changing, this treatment zone wouldn't be ideal. So the description of a treatment zone has changed over the years, as you pointed out. And I think it's important that we designate, if this is a 35, 45-year-old patient, this wouldn't be ideal. But if this is a 7-year-old child who is a -2 prescription, this ideally would be ideal, because we're getting 2 diopters of add in the periphery.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point for us to make for our younger practitioners who might be listening in. Again, as Susan and I were alluding to, we were around a few years ago when, and one of the first clinical studies I ever participated in was for Paragon. And, uh, and the protocol was very strict. It was 18 years and older. There was no children. That was not even thought about. And it was considered an alternative for people who could not, at that point in time, for whatever reason, have refractive surgery. This was a daytime vision freedom point. It's been interesting. Certainly, Euclid, as I can tell you from the history from the founders, told me that after a few years, they began to recognize what was going on, especially in mainland China with children. And they began to change the whole way the design, not the parameters, but the way the algorithm would calculate and how they could optimize things within their approval. And so these are very different products today than they were 30 years ago, wouldn't you say, Susan?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Great.
Can I chime in real quick?
Go ahead, Don. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to chime in real quick. So I think some take-home message is treatment zones usually, I think most doctors agree, that's more topographic than it is on the lens. So that's one. Two is, what are you doing? If you were to take on one message from this lecture today, I say that with myopia management, the purpose of orthokeratology is dioptric steepening, not dioptric flattening, because I think vision correction is just the side benefit of orthokeratology. The main benefit of orthokeratology for those kids is myopia management. Also important because I know a lot of new docs, they'll redesign lenses like 5 times when the patient's like a -1/4.
Yeah.
But the vision part of it is actually just the side benefit. Kids are very well adapted. You don't need to chase 0.25 cylinder. You can just leave it alone. Even if they have 0.75 cylinder, they can even wear a pair of glasses. Again, the main reason why you're doing orthokeratology in children is dioptric steepening in that reverse curve to get myopia management. So anyways, that's my definition of,
Yeah.
Susan, go ahead.
I'm just going to pipe in here. That is 100% correct. And you know what we have to do in those cases? Parental management.
That's right.
Because those parents are hovering. They're sitting in the room and they're looking at every letter. If they miss one on the 20/20, some of them get a little flipped out. So the first thing I do is tell them exactly what you just said, so that they keep in mind the purpose. I mean, they need to be able to see. Don't get me wrong, but they're not, flying airplanes. Well, some of them may. Yeah, right. So
it is interesting. I have to say I agree 100%. I think managing the parental expectation may be the hardest part of it, because you're right. If I'll go into offices, and I used to have, when I go to China a lot of time, they would push them down to like 2015 or 2010. And they'd go, they'd be picking out the letters and everybody. And I'm like, you've created a monster now. Because if that child sleeps on the wrong side and comes in tomorrow and that vision's dropped to 2025, that parent's going to be all over you. So I always recommend, this is my recommendation, I get them to the 2025 line and I start dancing and applauding. That's my barrier. That's where I tell them, if you get there, life is good. If they can go on and pick some out, I'm like, hey, that's great, but don't expect that every time. This is a little bit of fluidity to this process, depending on how long they slept in it, how consistent they are with wearing, even sleeping position. So don't expect 2015 when they walk in the door. It's just, that's a great comment. Tell us when you might want to make a treatment zone bigger or smaller. We talked about adults and children. Anything else that where you would look and say, I need to change? What are the indications that tell you you're looking at this beautiful topo, but something is telling you need to change something? What would those hints be?
Well, certainly if you had an adult, I mean, and we're not doing myopia management, and they were complaining about maybe some glare or halo at night, and you want to adjust for pupil size, sure, sure in adults. In kids, you also want to pay attention, but again, as David alluded to, you're more interested in getting in the red, so to speak. So you want to use the minimum, amount of myopic correction and get more of the hyperopic peripheral plus buildup in there. But again, sometimes you just have to manipulate it based upon the child's or the adult's pupil size and or sensitivity and or environmental conditions. So those would be the main areas. You have to also keep in mind that, and here's where, Jane, you brought this up before, there's the physical aspect of the back optic zone radius relative to what your treatment zone is. So depending upon the algorithm and how these lenses are built, you have to keep in mind that if you have a very, very low minus correction, you're often not going to get the same amount of peripheral hyperopic defocus that you want. So sometimes the zones have to be changed for that, for that reason as well.
And Kevin, if some people say, well, I wanted a smaller treatment zone, so I changed the optic zone diameter. Does that alone give me a smaller treatment zone?
I think in my definition, just to go back a little bit before I answer this, I think it all depends on who the target audience you're talking about. You're talking about like parental education. Some parents actually ask me about what this means, when you look at the topography. So when I target, towards parent, I will usually use a lingual like therapeutic area, therapeutic treatment zone. And treatment zone itself is kind of like a misnomer to me because this could be very misleading. It all depends on who you're talking to and what kind of lifestyle patients are using. And so I think to answer the question, what if the OZ size is going to be varied? Usually the treatment zone go with the OZ size. Typically, for my young patient, typically we'll start off at the very small treatment zone size, less than 5/8. And if they have smaller pupil, I even have to minimize that, even further to 5/6 to 5/4.
So you're using pupil diameter
as a reference
gauge.
point.
Okay. Yep. Is pupil diameter. Yep. Yeah. I just when I hear a lot of people talk about manipulating the optic zone, that's just your power curve on the back. It really has it's not going to give you a bigger or smaller treatment zone, in my understanding, unless I manipulate some other parameters. I have to change the sagittal depth. That's, there's got to be something. Just ordering a bigger or smaller didn't seem to me to be what I understood. Okay, let's move on to something else. This may be a tricky question, but most Ortho-K lenses today in the United States come with what is called a Jessen factor. That Jessen factor can be a +50 or it can be a +75 or whatever. But those are the most common ones. Somebody explained to me Jessen factor, and it's a parameter that you can change. You can call Euclid and say, I want you to change that Jessen factor to X. And if it's within our approval, we'll be glad to do that as you make these lenses patient specific. Somebody explain to me what Jessen factor is, how you consider it, and when or if you might make a change. Kevin, you were talking. You want to pick this one up and run with it?
Sure. So the way I define Jessen factor is the compression factor. It is to allow the patient to be able to have a sustainable vision throughout the whole day. So typically the Jessen factor is set as about +50 to +75 as a standard, but it can be vary among different manufacturers. So typically I'll be comfortable starting with the plus 75 Jessen factor for majority of my patient. But for older kids, if they're starting to, getting driving permit, or even young adult, driving at night all the time, I would actually be more inclined to increase the Jessen factor by a quarter, depends on the circumstance. That being said, I'm just lucky enough compared to you guys, I'm not serving adult population. My patient is only under 18. So I don't have, the trouble of, dealing with presbyopic. But, Jessen factor is an interesting topic, for patient around presbyopic age, because, if you have a high Jessen factor, they are not going to appreciate, having reading glasses all the time. And having a reducing Jessen factor, even have a slow low minus when they're reading in the evening, is actually a good thing for them. So it could help them minimize the need of reading glasses for adult population using Ortho-K. So I will let you chime in, and let's see.
Yeah, I'd sort of say, Ton, I've heard people mention changing Jessen factor for those children that seem to be rapidly progressing, even wearing the Ortho-K. Any experience with that, or give me your feeling on this Jessen factor?
Yeah, so I like to, just like I talk to my patients, I talk to my patients as if they're like a third grade student. Actually, I talk to the parents as if they're a third grader too. Because I think if you talk to them like they're a third grader, that means you actually know what you're doing, right? And so I'm going to talk to the audience like you're a third grader. Hey, the Jessen factor doesn't really matter. Don't just like banish that thought. Don't think about it very much. Now, do I change the Jessen factor sometimes? I have, if I'm doing like a -8, a -10, a -11, have I done it? Yes, I will bump with the Jessen factor. But otherwise, just do whatever the lens design says as a default, the manufacturer sets, and you're good to go.
I think this brings up kind of a conversation that we had earlier, and that was around what are we correcting here? What is the objective myopia management for children? I think Jessen factor as something that really needs to come into play is really only related to adults who are wearing lenses, and altering that Jessen factor based upon what happens at the end of the day. And, as kind of stated, a 35 to 45 or 50-year-old patient having a little extra minus in the evening, unless they're driving, is not a bad thing. And, most of the time we're recommending they have a pair of glasses that they can use for whatever reason. So kind of really only comes into play for adults in my practice. And going back to what was already said, I think Dr. Mayu really pointed this out very effectively, is that when we're doing myopia management, we're not doing vision correction. It's just a very beneficial side effect, right? The fact that people can see after they're corrected is just like this wonderful side effect, right? Atropine is a very good myopia management treatment, but it doesn't do anything for vision. And with orthokeratology, sometimes you can see 20/20 or 20/25, which is like this amazing thing. And so we really point that out. And when it comes to Jessen factor and being off by a quarter or a half at the end of the day, not a real big deal. But some people are really, really caught up on the very concise, very precise vision correction with myopia management. And that is just a really, really wide road to failure in my mind, because you're trying to make parents happy, and that's not going to happen if the kid sleeps wrong, or you don't get them to 20/25, or they have some residual lenticular cylinder. All of those sort of things kind of come into play. And
Yeah.
so, as already stated, we point that out right away at the beginning. And also we have some really other great evidence with regards to that. If I may, Jane, to just point that out, there's an incredible study that talks about partial treatment and its benefit for orthokeratology. Dr. Ma, you pointed out that really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a plus power, is what we're trying to do. It doesn't really matter how much, if we can get 2 or 3 diopters, that'd be really ideal. So there's a group of children in this particular study. Pauline Chu's group did it in Hong Kong, and it was for higher myopes, and there was a partial correction, and it showed that those children wearing spectacles during the day for their 2 or 3 or 4 diopters of myopia slowed down the progression using partial correction with myopia management or orthokeratology, and they didn't progress. And so, sometimes we just have to start off the conversation with a parent is like, your kid's going to wear glasses. They're going to wear glasses. We're going to do orthokeratology to slow down the progression, but they're going to wear glasses during the day. And then if you don't have them wear glasses, how cool is that? Right? I mean, you just exceeded their expectations. So
yeah, I find that is something, this he mentioned it earlier, and I'm going to say it again. Educating parents. I always say what the kids like about Ortho-K is that daytime vision. They don't know about the myopia. They don't care. Kids say, I can see to hit a baseball, or I can go swimming without my glasses. What the parent needs to understand is that vision is not number one. What's happening in that mid periphery with that plus is what we're after. I would often have parents in China come to me and go, well, he's 18 now. Does he need to keep wearing these? And I'm like, well, do you want him to continue to get myopic or not? So there is that disconnect. I think those are great comments, guys. Great comments.
Jane, I have a corollary to your question. I'm going to throw out to the group. So understanding what David and everybody has said about this not being about the vision, but thinking about the vision, I would wonder if anybody has thought of, or what you would answer to this, is if a child, let's say, can't wear or doesn't sleep in the lenses or doesn't wear them for as long as, 6-8 hours a night. So has anybody ever considered raising the Jessen factor to accommodate less wearing time? Curious about that.
That's an excellent question. Anybody ever thought about it? Tried it?
No, I haven't.
We may now, Susan, though, because that is a good thought.
Yeah, I don't do that typically. I'm just curious whether anybody knew of any studies or had any experience with it.
If anybody in the audience has an answer, please write it in for the questions and answer. We'd love to know. Let's talk about, I want to ask you guys about toric, or what we at Euclid call elevation specific toricity. Let's talk about that. One, what percentage of your practice today is in some kind of elevation variation type of lens? And do you expect that to grow, to decrease, or you think you're where it's going to be?
Oh, jump in. I think back in the old days, or still currently, some practitioners are using autorefractor as the primary mean to fit Ortho-K. But I think as time goes by, we're seeing that more and more practitioners are migrating towards the use of topography-based fitting guideline. And I think Ortho-K should be being guided by topography and other advanced technology in order to get the best clinical treatment outcome, especially when it comes to the idea of, having elevation, and stuff like that. I think in my practice, we typically use the sagittal height differential as the clinical guideline for designing whether patients should use a spherical versus a toric lens. So generally speaking, we're talking about if the sagittal height differential is less than 30 micron, we'll typically start off with a spherical Ortho-K. For someone have an elevation greater than 30 micron, we'll start off with a toric design.
Any other comments?
Yeah, so just to chime in, it's kind of, I do a lot of scleral lenses too, and so I see the trend being similar. I do mostly toric lenses now in both. So with sclerals, I'm like 90% or 95% toric because it helps the lens center better, less, more even compression. Same thing with orthokeratology. I think most patients have a little bit. And so I find that the toric lenses center better, the treatment zone is better, there's less with the wall astigmatism left over if you do it. I think 30 microns, like Kevin's mentioning, is a good benchmark. And at the 8 millimeter cord, that's important kind of where that 30 is. But basically, I'd say most of my designs now are toric in nature.
Susan,
I'll jump in there.
Yeah,
go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry.
She was shaking her head. That's the only reason I went to her.
So I agree with sclerals. It's 75% or whatever toric, depending on the diameter of the lens, of course. In orthokeratology, I'm at about 50% now with elevation-specific designs.
Good. Dave, how about
Yeah. Well, I think that the conversation needs to also point to what is toricity for an orthokeratology patient and who needs to go into a toric lens. You kind of alluded to that, Jane, but I think it's good that we clarify what that means. And could you go back to the topography that you had for the treatment zone
Oh,
just for a minute and
I
show
think
that?
I think we
So
might be able to do that.
we
Yeah.
we just did a pretty slick article that we are talking about this very discussion of who needs a toric and who needs a spherical. And I literally just texted my resident to say, what percentage do you think it is? And we're around 40%, give or take, with ours. Now, I believe this is actually an axial map, or a tangential map. But if we were to look at astigmatism in that top left-hand corner map there, if this patient had 2 diopters of astigmatism and it looked like that probably does not need a toric lens, because if you look at the peripheral cornea, it looks relatively spherical. And the landing of where the lens is on the eye tends to be spherical. So a spherically shaped back surface in this particular eye would work really well. And really what we need to be thinking about is the toricity of the lens, not the amount of the astigmatism. And do we need to make the outer portion of this lens have some toricity to match the outer surface of the cornea having toricity? And so, Jane, we pointed to the elevation map on our topographers. And if you were to click on the upper area where it is the most elevated and compare it to a horizontal area where it's least elevated, or vice versa, depending on with the rule or against the rule of astigmatism, if we're seeing kind of in that mid-central to peripheral cornea, depending on your topographer, depending on your treatment zone, depending on the lens design and diameter that you're using, if you see 30 microns or more of difference is kind of the standard amount, that if you were to put a spherical lens on there, you might not get the seal that we would be getting with a spherical lens on a spherical mid-peripheral cornea, and thus we wouldn't get this consistent ring. So if you see that your patient's lenses are shifting off center, or you're getting kind of an incomplete ring where it's not a complete ring, that could indicate that you're not getting enough suction force in there, and utilizing a toric back surface or an astigmatic type of lens from an orthokeratology would help you get that better fit. So I think it's important that we differentiate who needs it. You may have a patient with 2 diopters that's all central, that you don't need that type of lens, and vice versa. You might have a patient with 1 diopter and it goes limbus to limbus, and it really needs to have a toric lens parameter. And we base that by and large off the elevation map. And that's something that your consultant can kind of work with you, whether it's a Euclid consultant or at another company.
I think you guys really hit on it. There was 2 really important points there. 8 millimeter cord. So from center pupil out 4 and out 4. That 8 millimeter cord is where the lens is actually fit onto the cornea. Keep in mind that unlike daily GP lenses where the fitting is the base curve, this base curve has nothing to do with fit. It only drives sagittal depth for power. Your fitting occurs in that 8 millimeter cord. And so if you want to make a lens steeper or flatter, the Dr. Mai's point, you need to decide that by looking at the 8 millimeter junction, not there in the center. And that drives you to exactly what I think Dr. Kading was saying, is you've got to look at that area and say, is one primary meridian a different shape than the other? And if the answer is yes, you need to be thinking about toric lenses. A lot of practitioners call me or catch me in presentations, or if I'm out traveling, and they keep talking to me about refractive astigmatism and corneal astigmatism and residual astigmatism and lenticular astigmatism. And I'm like, forget all of that. Just forget that astigmatism word. just forget it. We don't care about astigmatism. We care about what toricity, and that's based on elevation. So again, it kind of gets back into our industry is maturing and the terminology is kind of a little flaky right now. So maybe we can help with that. Great answers.
I would just add that, and again, you made a good point, because sometimes people get so caught up in the refractive astigmatism, they don't even realize that it's a lenticular that's coming through the refraction, and the cornea is perfectly spherical. So that's easy to forget on a busy day.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful. But the other thing that I would use as a guideline, and I don't know if you're getting to that yet, is the centration of the lens is even more key. So just keep in mind, if you are doing by elevation lenses, and let's say they're riding a little low, you might actually have too much astigmatic, if you will, correction in there. They're riding high, it means you need a little bit more. So you sort of have to know how that plays into the centration as well, and understanding that horizontal decentration often has to do more with the diameter of the lens. So there are other factors that come into play.
That is a lesson I learned the first time I ever went to a lab, is when it comes to elevation difference, less is better.
Right.
If you overestimate that amount of toricity, you're going to get a very tight lens. It's going to be tight. You'll get staining. You'll get shutdown of tear pumping. You don't want that. So if you think you need 1.5 diopters of toricity, I'd say order a 1, because the chances are the 1.5 isn't what you need. Let's talk about, I want to ask you about empirical fitting. I get a lot of young practitioners, especially coming out of school, and they're like, I love this. I can do these 3 things. I can do a refraction. I can get an HVID. I don't understand the design yet. So I know it fits there. But I hear a lot of very experienced practitioners talking about using empirical fitting. So I want you guys to tell me, does empirical fitting fit in your practice, and why? Is it for a less experienced person, or do you do it? And then I'd also like to get your kind of general feelings on these little design specific calculators that seem to be so popular, or the big topographical data, analyze every snippet. Where and how do you utilize them today, and where do you see them tomorrow? I know that was kind of a big question. Who wants to start? Who's analyzing? Come on.
I can jump in.
Okay.
So most of my fits are empirically designed, and I think it leads to a better first fit experience for the patient, and as well as it kind of just saves me time at the consult. To be honest, it's kind of a practice management thing, because studies show that people take too long. If you take too long, people are going to get tired, and they're gonna, I'm gonna get out of here. I'm just tired. I need a snack. And so I like to just do empirical design. I used to take the topography. Get
maybe you should have snacks in your office.
Actually, I have snacks. I have this huge price counter, and we give dollars, and we give gift cards to McDonald's, Starbucks, and stuff like that. And by the way, that's huge. You have a price counter. If you don't have a price counter, you're not the Ortho-K fitter. So anyways, so snacks are good. But anyways, I do what's empirical fitting. Saves time. Also easier to scale, because I'm trying to create a business that can run without me, and it's easier for my associate doc who is she's just a 1 year, she's a 2020 grad. It's easier for her to just design and get the first lens on if it's empirically designed. She just sends the information to Euclid, RX, HVID, K values, and she emails the topographies to you guys. And the lens on its way, right? It's just less work. And so multiple reasons why we do empirical design, but it's easier for the patients, it's quicker, better first fit, and pretty effective. I think back in the day it probably wasn't as effective, but now the photographers today are pretty accurate. It works pretty well.
Kevin, how about you? Since you are 100% referral and 100% pediatric, it's important for you to get it right and get it right quickly.
Yeah, so for me, I'm also using empirical fitting the majority of time, and especially for young population, parents are very concerned and pretty tedious about it's cleaning, hygiene, and stuff like that. I think especially during the pandemic, people are just being more sensitive to any sort of like direct contact. And if you are using trial set, I think patient will be slightly more uncomfortable doing trial set. So for me, parent usually ask me for one thing, just direct fitting. And I think, just like Dr. Mai said, it will be saving chair time a lot, and also builds up a better rapport with patient. Because I think the way empirical fitting would actually portray the idea that, okay, you know what you're doing. Okay, you're actually customize the lenses for patient. So I think the image of being professional and being customized is the key for young population.
Wonderful. Let's talk a little bit, guys, about lens materials. I spent a few years early in my career working for a company called Polymer Technology. For those of you who don't know that name, they were the original inventors of all the products you now know as Boston lenses and Boston solutions. So I got kind of a little bit of, polymer chemistry 101. So I look at material as a valuable part. So I think of design, material together as what I want. What do and tell me a little bit about what's your expectations of a performance of a material? What do you expect it to do and what do you want it to do?
I think Susan probably can speak to this historical perspective a little better than some of us,
Oh, he's
although
picking on us,
she
Susan.
although she doesn't look as old and knowledgeable. She is extremely knowledgeable in this particular area. But I can speak to a little bit of my experience, having done this for 15 years. And even 15 years ago, we really had to be making these incredible decisions upon the material that we were selecting, particularly because we had so poor of solutions, and the material wettability, correlation with oxygen permeability, correlation with durability, there wasn't a good connection. If you wanted a durable lens, it didn't wet. If you wanted a high oxygen permeable lens, it wasn't durable. Right. And so there was this huge disconnect between the things that you wanted. And then the lens that kind of did a good job in all sort of them was just kind of a kind of lens all over the place. But fortunately, the newer generation of fitters and the students that I speak to today, we hardly converse about materials at all, because the materials nowadays have really been doing a good job. We still would like to have lenses, particularly approved for orthokeratology, that have higher oxygen permeability. I think that's something that we've all wanted. Many people don't know that the approval of the lenses that we have today is for a lens with a very low oxygen permeability. So that's something that, hopefully you can speak to a little bit here later, Jane. But I really want to know Susan's perspective of how she has navigated this transition, and whether she feels like we've come a long way in the last 5-10 years.
And I'd like to throw out the question, you mentioned oxygen permeability. I have doctors who ask me, they'll say it's not as important in a closed eye. I was trained it was more important in a closed eye. Another point of my confusion. So what do you think? Is closed eye, if you're blinking, I figure you're getting oxygen. If you got that eye closed, I get a little worried. So, just opinions on whether higher oxygen flow is a need in Ortho-K. And Susan, give us that history.
Well, it all started in 1902 when I was born. Now, so I have seen the gamut of lenses. Look, I mean, I go back to PMMA, to Polycon, to the fluorosilicone acrylate, to the silicone acrylates, then to the fluorosilicone acrylate, then to all the others. So I grew up with these lenses in corneal designs, and then now we're talking about them in both scleral designs and Ortho-K designs, and the same balance of properties discussion applies today as it did then. And that is, you want durability, reproducibility, wettability, and oxygen permeability. And you want the best of everything. And we know we can have it because we have these new materials. But then over here on the side, you have something that starts with an F, and it's called FDA. And the problem with that has been there were certain there were certain materials that were already approved for overnight orthokeratology. So the companies were beholden to that and had to just send you the lenses in those materials. You could request another material that was off label, but then they'd have to document that the doctor said, there was some legal issues. So We fortunately now, and I think, Jane, you're going to be talking a little bit about this later.
We are.
We now have some wonderful news in that we can have the best of all worlds. And when it comes to orthokeratology, I find it a little different. I find we're fitting kids mostly. Kids don't have the same issues as my 55-year-old presbyopes trying to wear their, gas permeable lenses that are filming up every 3 minutes. First of all, they're not blinking and they don't need to see through them. So the wettability is important, but it's not as problematic in children. Oxygen permeability, I'm with you, Jane. I want the most oxygen permeable material on the eye. When we talk about flexibility or durability, we often wonder, is the lens flexing on the eye? Is that going to cause a problem? But again, with orthokeratology, you have a lens where it's not moving. The lid is against it. There's a certain, I'll use the word standard or even pressure. So I'm not so worried about flexure as I would be in a scleral lens. So for me, oxygen permeability is, I think, key in the overnight Ortho-K world. The other properties are important, but I think in this case, for me, oxygen rules.
Well, I'll tell you what. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. If our esteemed panel will flip off their cameras, you get to yawn a little bit. I've got a couple of PowerPoint slides I want to share with the audience. You've heard our discussion already about why we might choose a DK, not only a high DK, but I want to get into that hyperspace area. I want these children and their parents to be assured that the physiological advantages that I can reduce the edema as much as possible. There are studies that tell us that a healthy cornea is the easiest one to fight off infection. So that's important too. So why have we not been choosing? We've been, using very adequate lenses, but certainly not these hyperoxygen flow lenses. And that had to do with what Susan just mentioned. Poor wettability. It often required specialized surface treatments. They tended to deposit. Maybe they flexed, they warped. They needed to be replaced and cleaned specially. So we've had this kind of, we wish we had it, but we couldn't get it. So tonight, I want to introduce you to Euclid Max and Euclid Max Toric. Now, Euclid Max and Euclid Max Toric are going to be complementary products to our 20-year existing time-proven performance of Euclid Emerald and Euclid Emerald Toric. So many people said, "Oh, are they going away?" Absolutely not. They are there and they will be there as always for you and your patients. But we are introducing Euclid Max and Euclid Max Toric in the U.S. Tonight, and it will be quickly followed in some other markets. And then over the next few years, Euclid will be rolling it after we get approval into the 20 individual markets that we service. Now, you'll notice when that popped up there, it said Tisofocon A, and a lot of people ask me. Now I'm putting back on my polymer technology hat for a few minutes here, and let's see if I can explain how basically 3 different companies and 3 different materials are carrying the same, what we call a USAN name, which is the government's approval name. And what they're approving is the recipe, the fundamental building blocks of that plastic. And as those are what we call monomers. So how much of each one you put in there, and then how you make it become solid, or what we call polymerization. Now, back in the late 1990s, our friends over at Minicon, if you remember the late 1990s, you'll know that was a time where we were all pushing to get these hyper silicone, high DK soft lenses so our patients could sleep in them 30 days at a time. Well, it took us a few years, but we learned the lesson that that might not be the best thing for most of our patients. But Minicon approved a material called Minicon Z. It is currently FDA approved for up to 30 days of extended wear. It requires a very specific plasma, a little more extensive plasma treatment to improve its surface wettability. But it's been there and it's used in many different markets, including here in the US. Now, in 2018, our friends in Europe at Contimac took that same basic formula and they said, we think we could take this formula and make some changes to it. And so they did some polymerization and mixing, so same general material, same recipe, but in various arrangements, in various amounts, different polymerization. They came up with a material that is approved for daytime wear only, but it did not require any plasma treatment. It seemed to wet very well on its own. And many of you know that in your daily wear GP patients. Well, over the last couple of years, in a partnership with Euclid, we've been able to go to our US FDA and we have received exclusive approval to utilize that material for overnight orthokeratology. Now, it's only available through Euclid. It requires no additional surface treatment, and it allows us a hyper decay with a better balance of some of those properties. And those properties, some of them we've already mentioned, but properties include things like first fit success. We talked about empirical fitting, and many of you know that our internal data tells us that 87% of the lenses are only ordered one time. So excellent, minimizes our chair time. Dr. Mai mentioned that, gets patients satisfied quickly. We have to have good wetting. These are lenses that live in a tear film. The front and back of these lenses are coated with natural tears. They have to be able to wet well. We all want that hyper decay, and we want that because these are young, healthy eyes, and they could potentially be wearing these lenses for 10, 12, 14 years. So we want to make sure we give them as much margin for safety as possible. And of course, as far as the lens characteristics, we want it to be stable. We want it to be durable, to resist any warpage, scratches, chips. These are, in our lab, these lathing cuts are at the sub-micron level. That's how tightly we control them. And so if a lens bends or warps, then we lose some of the effectiveness of our design. So we need something to produce you the highest quality lens, and we need that reproducibility. Now, people ask me about the clinical outcomes. There's a few studies here, and I just put them up on a slide. We'll be glad to give you the references if you don't take a picture or whatever. One of them was done by Lum and Swarbrick, and they were looking at how much oxygen getting to the cells, and would high decay improve the cellular metabolism. And what they concluded was that it would, and it would probably therefore promote faster shape changes in Ortho-K. We get better, quicker clinical response, according to their theory. The author actually made a quote that in high decay materials should be used for overnight orthokeratology, not only to provide the physiological advantages of high oxygen flow, but to also improve our clinical outcomes as far as shape changes. And then several different studies, we've listed 4 of them here, seem to come to the same conclusion that higher oxygen flow is, it keeps the cornea healthy, and it keeps tight junctions, and that results in a potentially reduced risk of infections. So 2 clinical reasons that we want to look at higher oxygen permeability products. Now, for those of you who like to read labels, here is what will come if you order a lens. This will be in your package. It gives you all of the different things. The decay value here, as the FDA has accepted and given us, is 180 decay. So it's a hyper decay material, and that is using the polographic method. You'll see wettability. I have to tell you, it's almost impossible to compare different materials because there's about 4 or 5 different ways to measure it, and they all give you different numbers. Some of them have advancing angles and decreasing angles. This one is the Cecil drop angle, And I'm just going to tell you that higher numbers are better in that measurement. 90.7 is considered excellent wettability in that measurement category. All of the other things you see here, I'm just going to drop down to next to the bottom because this is always important. This product is available to you in both blue and green colored tints. Now, remember that Euclid puts a unique identifier. We laser mark it into the edge of every lens, so we can tell you every lens, where it came from, who it's for, what the parameters are, and what day we made it. But to help the kids and the parents, you can color code right and left with blue and green. Now, the final thing I want to tell you about is real quickly, we started giving selected practitioners access to this product about 14 months ago. We selected high volume Ortho-K fitters, but we selected some newer practitioners as well as some of us that are more seasoned eye care practitioners. And this was real simple. We said, we're going to give you access to this material. And we want you to fit as many patients as you can. We don't care if they're new fits and never had a lens on before, or if they're refits or just annual replacements. If you will give us your clinical feedback on durability, wettability, comfort, deposit resistance, and ease of cleaning. Now, we're still collecting this data, but I want to give you the early snapshot. This is 144 patients, and it says percent of satisfaction. I'm not sure that's the best word. It may be percent of ratings, but you see here, out of the 0 to 100 scale, 95.8% rated the durability at 95. Surface wettability also ranked very high at 95. Comfort, so just impressions of comfort coming back from their patients, was at 95%. Deposit resistance, patients are different, tear chemistries are different. You can expect some deposits. But it wasn't much, 86.7. And if they did get deposits, ease of cleaning ranked way up there at 90. So they seem to be fairly easy to manage in a child's hands. So the key findings from our practitioners in this group, 100% of them are telling us that they would recommend Euclid Max for their next Ortho-K patients, and that in their opinion, it offers better or equal comfort to whatever they've used previously. So, if we can give them 3 times as much oxygen, or whatever that number is, I don't want to say it's 3 times because the percentage may be wrong, but if we could give them a hyper decay and not have to trade off other properties, we want the balance of properties to be what we need in the clinical setting. So that is Euclid Max, what we hope you'll see as a breakthrough for overnight orthokeratology. And again, available in both the spherical and the elevation specific Max toric design. Now, let's see where we're at. I also wanted to mention to you that you can now order this product anywhere in the United States by contacting us at the phone number or the email below. Our consultant staff is always there if you have other questions. And I'm proud to say that we believe so much in this product that we are offering you a no-risk, 100% satisfaction guarantee. Now, what that means is if you try Max and you or your patient do not believe that it's what it is or that you like it, if you don't like it, then in a period of time, we're going to give you a period. I've forgotten what it is. Your salespeople can help you with that. But we will remake that lens of identical parameters in the Opera Focon A, our tried and true material. So you have nothing to risk here. We're hoping you try it. We hope you're as excited about it as we are, and we're willing to give you the guarantee to back it up. Now, I mentioned your sales team, and I do want to bring these 3 important faces up. I'm sure most of you have received phone calls or emails from them. And so please, you can call our 1-800 number and we'll put you in touch, or if you can get directly in touch with them through sales at Euclid. Okay, let's, panelists, would you please turn back on your cameras? Okay, great. They didn't fall asleep, so that's a good thing. See, they're still up and going. All right. I am pleased to tell you that all four of tonight's panelists have been participants in their office in that early access program. So at this point, folks, I'm just going to ask your opinions. So tell us your general opinion on Euclid Max and how you and your patients feel about it.
You know, Jane, I think the big thing that can be said of this is I haven't noticed a difference. And I think that's an important thing to point out. You know, I didn't have a lot of patients complaining about their lenses breaking or their lenses not wetting or their lenses not being breathable. But I'm not hearing anything different. I don't know that we've had any lens breakages with the new material. I do hear that from time to time with the older material, and so there's a real good durability to this material that is at least as good, if not better, than the old one from my observation. You know, and we haven't had any discomfort or irritation or wettability issues that I can remember, and you know that I've seen. And then you know, you can rest a little easier knowing that there's a better oxygen permeability. You know, when it comes to kids, we certainly want to be doing what's in the best interest of the kids, and for adults too. With overnight wear, we know the risks of infections. We know the risk of microbial keratitis go up in overnight wear, and so anything we can do to reduce those risks over time, I think, is the key component. So unfortunately, I can't come in and say, hey, my patients, you know, used to hate their lenses and now they love them. I think that speaks to how good, you know, materials have been, but we have a safer lens that is very durable and has a great wettability. And I think those are the three key components that I hope everybody walks away from tonight: is safe, durable, and wettable.
Kevin, any further comments from you?
Just to chime in real quick, yeah, I actually did have more breakage with the previous material, but I had any issues with this new one, HDK, so I think it's more durable. So, but besides that, I agree with Dr. Katie. Yeah, it's going well, and just gonna keep going.
Yeah, you know, breakage is always one of those things. You know, I work with our quality team here and we follow every complaint that comes in from around the world. And it's always interesting to me because the number one complaint in rigid lenses, and I have to say this back many years ago at a lab I worked with, the number one complaint is discomfort, right? Because they're rigid. You have to get over that hurdle. Once you do, though, the other one was breakage. Kids will break lenses. And I got to say, parents, I came in one day and there was a parent and she said, I'll clean his lens. And she had her palm out flat and she was like scrubbing away here. And I walked up and said, do you clean them like that every night? Oh, yeah, I get them great. You know, and I'm like, okay, we need to talk here. So, you know, don't let them overdo, because, you know, these again are very, very highly honed designs. So I don't want them overdoing it. So, Kevin, how about you? Any comment?
I've been fitting this product Euclid Max in the past couple months. Again, just I agree with all the panelists. Say, you know, it's very durable and comfortable. I think one of the main initial concerns for patient and parent is that, you know, Ortho-K is uncomfortable. It's been stigmatized that Ortho-K has always been uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And you know, like Dr. Keating said, we cannot get rid of the lens awareness, but at least we can try to minimize the awareness so that patients have a better experience at nighttime. And so I think so far patients have been very satisfied, and also, you know, even patients have, you know, saying that, you know, they are very comfortable, barely knowing the lens is actually there. And some can even wear the lenses to school for the whole day, which I strongly discourage. And but that just brings up a point that, you know, patients are just getting better experience with a new product because they have compromised all the good stuff in one lens, and which I never experienced that before.
Dr. Resnick, any final comments from you? Oh, Susan, I think we have you muted.
Hello. like David was saying, I never had a problem before. My patients never, they didn't complain, and everything was always great. And I was one of the practitioners who came in, I think, a little more recently, and tried the new lenses. So I have a cohort of patients that were new patients, who were new to orthokeratology, but the majority of patients that I put into this lens had been in the original design, and they were, I'll use the word crossovers. So what was interesting is when I told the parent that I'm getting them their replacement lens in a little bit of a different material, I didn't say too much because I didn't want to plant any seeds. And when they came back, almost invariably, the patient was saying when they were waking up in the morning, they just felt better. They weren't as, like dying to get them out the way they normally would be. They sometimes would say, I almost forgot to take them out before I left for school. So they were a little more comfortable in the morning, which suggested to me that something good was happening with the new material. And then the other thing I was noticing in the new patients, I thought it was my imagination, but then when I went and reread Helen Swarbrick's study, which obviously it's a 10 or 11-year-old study, and I know I had read it recently, but certainly didn't remember. And then I read it and I thought, gee, this makes sense to me now, because I was seeing a little bit of a quicker response in these new patients. The vision was coming around a little quicker and in the new material. And I was, I never really put two and two together, to be honest with you, until I looked at that study where she suggests that more oxygen helps the metabolic properties of the cornea and may indeed facilitate a quicker response. So look, I didn't do a study to prove it, but I was noticing better comfort in the morning and a little bit more rapid reduction of the myopia in my new patients. So that was my experience. The good news is I've never had breakage problems with my patients, so I don't want to jinx it.
Don't jinx it.
I can't speak to that part at all.
Yeah, I want to get to our audience questions. They've been great. They've listened to us all prattle on now for an hour. So let me throw out some questions from our audience. I thought this is really good. When using Ortho-K for athletes in a sports vision program, is that different than a regular myopia management design? Do you do something different for these highly active sports people? Anybody?
Are we talking about an adult or a child?
Nope, we're talking about children.
Yeah, so I would keep it the same unless they're playing something at night baseball or something. But no, the answer would be no for me.
Yeah, would anybody consider maybe a different diameter, like sometimes a larger diameter, or it just, you don't think it's going to have any impact at all?
Well, I
Nothing?
think, if you go to a lens that has a larger treatment zone, you'll have less plus in the periphery, and likely have a reduced, you'll have a little bit of a reduced myopic management component. And so, I think that's just a conversation you have with the parent is, your child may have a
What's
little
the
bit
goal?
reduced vision. But if our primary objective of doing this, if we're really trying to get the kids' vision optimized for sports, orthokeratology could be the right option, but a pair of spectacles or soft contact lenses could be too. But if we're trying to reduce the progression of myopia, then that's really where we're trying to go. What's the goal?
Yeah, I've got some patients that they are trying to get to the major leagues and or get a college scholarship. For them, sometimes if they're really picky, we're talking about type A parents, then I would just do soft multifocals during the day, switch them to a single vision during the game, and back in the soft multifocals afterwards. That has worked very well. But honestly, a lot of those patients, if they're not, unless they're super type A, they do fine with orthokeratology too.
Yeah,
I think the key is to set realistic expectation for patient and parent as well. Because I have a number of kids who are in fencing, archery, they're in national league, and I think the expectation has been elevated from their standpoint, and they want nothing other than 20/15 vision. So as a result, I think we have to cater based on their lifestyle and their preferences, and I will be willing to compromise some of the myopic defocus effect in exchange for better vision. So that's just my personal approach.
Great. How about we talked about this earlier? Here's a question. There's been much debate on the best back surface optic zone diameter for the ideal myopia control in Ortho-K. A few studies have cited 5.8 and smaller, may be more effective in myopia control. However, when considering the optics in the pupil size, is that an absolute parameter when designing Ortho-K? We kind of get back to that. Is the answer to make the optic zone smaller, or is that one parameter out of several that we may need to change? Anybody want to
Yeah,
tackle that?
I think it's one of several. I think we're really trying to deal with the sagittal depth as much as the optic zone, and the optic zone plays a component into this. I saw this question kind of come through when we were having that discussion about the topography, and I think we kind of answered it in a way, really about, there's more things that go into to the whole equation than just the optic zone, as you pointed out.
I agree. Oh, here's great. How much decentration is acceptable? Any?
That question was asked by my resident, so obviously I probably should let somebody else answer it because she wants a good answer.
She wants a good answer, so we can't let Dr. Kading answer that. So one of you guys want to answer for his resident? How much decentration do you consider acceptable? I mean, nothing's perfect, even though I know you like to fit perfect lenses.
I think one clinical pro for new practitioner, especially new to topography, is that we're not looking for perfect picture, and slight decentration is actually acceptable as long as the visual acuity and other binocular vision is not being compromised. And I think in my experience, decentration up to 1 millimeter laterally is okay, but vertically seems to be slightly more symptomatic for patient. Meaning they're actually being aware of the lenses vertically.
I'll accept more nasal decentration than I will temporal because of angle kappa.
Yeah, there's a good thought. That's now. I thought I had another one up here that I wanted to look at. Oh, somebody please elaborate on what we meant about when the patient sleeps incorrectly, they have different vision outcomes. We mentioned that earlier, that if they had a specific sleep, I was thinking less hours, like if they're studying for exams and they're up, where they only get 4 hours, then they're not going to get the same vision they get if they get 7 hours of sleep. That's an obvious one.
Have you ever walked in on your children while they're sleeping? Like, it is amazing the positions they can be in and be perfectly restful. I mean, they're sleeping on their face. They've got their teddy bear like right up like this, and their tongues out. I mean, that's incorrect sleeping, if you ask me. That's what I meant by incorrect sleeping.
Yeah.
And it could be causing some alterations to how the lenses are fitting on the eye. So I wouldn't recommend you go check out children unless they're your own, but make sure that, any parent who's had a child that's pretty young can speak to this, like, weird positions that they get in, and they're out.
Yeah. And so their vision, if it's been consistently good and suddenly one morning it's bad, I always tell them, don't worry, you probably slept wrong. Try it tonight. If it's better tomorrow, that's all it is.
Yeah, so variations like that happen all the time. Look into how long they've been sleeping. So one of the questions we ask, at least my tech asks on our template, is how long did they sleep with it last night, and how long do they sleep on average? So it's part of our actually, like, every Ortho-K follow-up, we ask that question. And then also even sometimes I'll find that patients wear them a lot during the day. Not during the day, basically they wear them for like 2 hours right before they go to bed. So they're wearing it, they're blinking with it, they're vertical. And so ask that question as well, because sometimes that can influence the treatment as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a question to the panel is, how long do they need to wear their lenses? I know what I say, but I hate that question because I mean, yeah, how long do you think they need to wear their lenses?
Anybody
Not
got an
everybody
answer?
at once.
Yeah.
Well, I gauge it by, the level of correction and the myopia progression and I aim for 8 hours a night. I mean, that's what I aim for. It's going to vary, but on the whole, that's my recommended sleep pattern.
I try to
Anybody
keep it
else?
more open-ended, no less than 6 hours. And I think, if you ask Jane, visiting China, the hospital in China actually have a very comfy chair and let patient to, wear the lenses for about 20 to 30 minutes to take a look and see the wow effect for them. And I think parents were just amazed. They thought that it's going to take months to see the results here in the United States. But I think when I tell them it's just a number of days, it's just amazing for them.
I do the same as Kevin. I just say in general 6 or more is good because a lot of my kids, oh man, they're I'm near like a university, so a lot of these kids are competing like crazy to get into like UCLA and UC Irvine, stuff like that. So like they don't sleep very much. And so if I told them, oh, you have to sleep 8, I'd have like 80% dropout. So
well, I tell them 8, figuring it's going to be 6. If I tell them 6, it becomes 4. So
that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. I like that too.
There's a fun factor here.
So let me throw a little wrench into this. When you have a child who's a -4 and you correct 4 diopters within the first couple of weeks and they're sleeping 6-8 hours, but then they have a 4-hour night, do they not get a good correction? No, because then all that needs to be corrected is a quarter or a half a diopter. And so I think it's like after you kind of get settled in, 2 to 5 hours would be probably plenty for the vast majority of people whose prescription is set, because really the treatment doesn't need to do a lot. And Kevin, you pointed it out, in an hour, if somebody sits with an Ortho-K lens on, they usually get about a diopter correction or 3/4 of a diopter. It may not last as long. So just kind of the whole question of how long, that shouldn't preclude somebody from going into orthokeratology if their child only sleeps 6 hours a night. But most kids do sleep far longer than that.
Which brings me to another quick practice management thing. If you're developing your practice and you're getting into this, I would encourage you to maybe use some words like device or retainer instead of contact lens, because I think it gives a little bit more clout to the whole process and what it is. And yes, we know they're contact lenses, but they're more than that. And that speaks to what David's saying, in that it's a retainer. And again, it's not a device like glasses or ordinary contact lenses to correct refractive error. It has a different purpose. So I believe that language and what we call things matters to patients, just how things are perceived.
I think it's a great thing. I've got one more question I want to ask you, and unfortunately, our 90 minutes has run out. I've been having a great time. We could talk on, but it's getting kind of late. Somebody asked me, what overall percentage of the children do you expect to drop out of Ortho-K in those first several months? What do you lose? Susan says she never loses one.
I haven't lost a patient yet.
Wow, that's impressive.
Hey, it is.
Yeah, usually the issues are insertion removal, in which case we switch them to atropine. But I'd say insertion removal is by far the number one barrier in terms of any dropout. But still, for us, it's very rare. Less than 5% for sure, less than 2%. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but not very many. But I'm not as good as Susan, so I get some that can't put the lens in, even though we've tried teaching them for like hours.
We lose the parents because we kill them, but the kids we never lose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to say that's the difference in what I always considered a successful GP fitter, is the one who had the words there to put the parent and that child mind at rest. That, I used to tell these kids, there's nothing about this can cause you any serious damage. We're not going to like lose an eye over this. Let's go. There was a question about different countries. When will different people? I'm going to refer those questions. Anything that has to do with that, please talk to your sales reps who we put up. David Bland covers our rest of the world. And of course, we have our team in Shanghai. We have a full wholly owned subsidiary over in Shanghai. So there is a Euclid team in China we can put you in touch with if you are going. Maybe I've had students going back home to China and they needed a practitioner. we'll be glad to help you with that. I think we're running out of time. So I want to, oh yeah. So if we didn't get to your questions, I hope we covered most of them in the presentation. Please don't hesitate. My email is up here now, and I can put you in touch with our panelists. Most of them are easily found on social media platforms. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. It is difficult, and I know, but I hope we've been a little bit entertaining. I had fun with it, but I hope we've also given you some of the confidence, and some of our experience maybe has worn off. And I hope you can see why all of us at Euclid are so excited about having Euclid Max join our product offering. We've been blessed to have wonderful products for over 20 years, and we're just going to keep looking at making them better and better for you over the next few. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.